with Dr. Sonia and Dr. Caitlin, and we are pretty excited today because we are going to talk about brain health. And I don't know about you guys, but I personally love brain health. That is my favorite thing to geek out on. It's my favorite thing to talk to patients about. It's my favorite thing to treat, because if you affect the brain, you can just affect everything else in the body. And so what we're hoping today is that, and what I'm excited to learn from you guys on, is what you're seeing in your offices with brains that are malfunctioning or toxic brains. We spend a lot of time in our office talking about toxic brains and all the variety of symptoms they can cause, all the toxins that are affecting them. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And I feel so strongly, and I know you guys do as well, that we live in the most toxic time in human history, and the brain is really taking the brunt of it. So let's start with you, Dr. Caitlin. Tell me just overall, what are you seeing in your office as far as symptoms and conditions that people are experiencing with poor brain health?
Yeah, I wish I could say that I've had a single person come in who doesn't have some form of toxic brain. It doesn't happen. So anytime that anybody has any kind of symptom, you can pretty much trace it back to the brain for the most part. Now, the severity is going to differ, obviously, right? Yeah. But the brain is always, always, always involved, especially since it has that tissue that's just like a sponge. So it wants to absorb everything into it and hold on to it. And you know, one of the glands that I'm most fascinated with is the pituitary, and we'll talk more, later. But the pituitary controls so many things, and that's actually one of the places that becomes the most toxic the soonest. And so I haven't seen somebody who doesn't have some varying degree of toxicity, especially related to pituitary function. Yeah. How about you, Dr. Sonia?
Yeah, I'll have to agree. I don't think there's anyone that comes in that doesn't have some sort of an effect. I think one of the symptoms that a lot of women especially will come in with is brain fog.
Yes.
Right? So it's like brain fog, it's fatigue, short-term memory. I'm going to say that's probably one of the first things that kind of puts a little fire under them to get some help, because they're starting to realize, I was doing something, then I completely forgot why I was there, what I was doing, and it can be a really scary feeling. And I don't think a lot of people really connect that toxic load to memory, right? Or to the brain fog. So yeah, I agree. I don't think there's anyone that comes in that doesn't have some sort of an effect in the brain, and specifically the pituitary gland.
But that's just aging.
Right. I was just going to say, the memory piece is like ridiculous. I can tell you that probably everybody that I sit down with that's 40 or older, when I ask them, tell me how your memory is. Are you losing track of words? Do you walk into a room and not know why you're there? Are you having trouble with memory? Like, as far as like stories that or scenarios that happened years ago, everybody says yes. Everybody has. I have not sat with a patient recently that hasn't had some kind of memory issue.
And I'm going to say it's even younger than 40 now. Like I have a few patients in their 20s, and, and that has to do with a lot of stress and schooling and all that. But a big part of it is toxicity, because they're growing up in a more toxic world than we even did. So I think it's starting at an even younger age than 40.
And it was me. I had that.
Right.
I had, big time brain fog and problems recalling and remembering names. And I remember everything, to the point in which, people are like, what? We had this conversation like a year ago. How do you remember that?
Right.
I was suffering from it big time. So it affects everybody. And
well, I think that's a great place to start. Maybe if you want to share some of your story so that women can relate to what that actually looks like in real life.
Yeah, I chalked it up to just being stressed out, go, running a business, trying to balance personal, marriage, work life. And it's just part of getting old, right? You're doing too much, you're too stressed out. And that's definitely not the case. And so it wasn't until I actually thought I had a thyroid problem, truthfully. Because when you chalked up all the symptoms, so the memory, the brain fog, the fatigue, those are the big things that I had. All the labs came back normal though. My thyroid's fine, my TSH is normal, my T3, my T4. And it wasn't until I actually talked to a good colleague of mine who happened to be a really good friend of mine throughout schooling, Brad. He was like, you got to go and get these tests done. Like there's more to it. Yep, sure enough, it was my pituitary wasn't communicating properly, and it would have ended up, I have no doubt in my mind, with a thyroid problem. But now it's not that when I don't get exhausted or things like that my memory doesn't slip. But I don't have that issue. I'm back to remembering, okay, what did I say? Who's this person? What's that? And it was just because I started diving in and detoxing and addressing the pituitary and the brain. And that's the big thing.
What was the test? I'm kind of curious what test it was.
Sure. So I started off with really extensive blood work, and I did a saliva adrenal profile test to find out how my hormones that my pituitary was producing, how it was affecting me. So what my cortisol was doing, what my DHEA was doing, what my FSH, my LH, and then just the gamut of my hormones, my estrogens, testosterone, progesterone, that kind of thing. And it came back that my pituitary was just under firing. It wasn't able to keep up with the demand that I needed, especially for the age that I am. So that was the test that it started off with. And then I went on and did, to find out what was causing the pituitary to malfunction, I did a urine heavy metal challenge test to find out, okay, what am I dealing with here? And it came back crazy, like high mercury, lead, cadmium.
Wow.
Those were the big ones. And I don't even have any mercury fillings. So, as we keep talking, I'm the crazy doctor that can pretty much trace almost everything back to something happening in the mouth. And I've never had mercury fillings. My dad can't remember. I might have had one on like a baby tooth, like a month or two before it fell out, but you're getting mercury, and it's not just from the fish. It's
What about, did you ever have a flu shot as a child?
No flu shots, but I had other vaccines.
So environmental.
So back in the 80s, growing up in the 80s, the vaccines were loaded with
aerosol.
And so, that's where I got, I'm sure that's where I got my mercury. And now they claim that mercury is not in vaccines, but there's other things. There's aluminum, there's other heavy metals, that just go and get absorbed. So we're constantly being bombarded with these things.
Yeah, that was the same for me. My mercury was off the charts, and I never had any silver fillings. So I do think it was the vaccinations that we got in, I was late 70s. So I do think it was that. And what you explained there too with the testing and then going towards the heavy metals, that is the theme I see. And I would say 98% of the women that come in with hormonal issues. So it's the same thing. They'll kind of think, okay, I have cold hands and feet. I'm feeling depressed. My hair is falling out. So you're thinking right away, okay, it's thyroid. And then you start investigating a little bit more. It's like, okay, their ovaries are off. Like I have one specific patient. She's in her early 20s. She's got PCOS. She's got Hashimoto's, major adrenal fatigue. So there's all this stuff going on. And I think, you could go in that direction where you're treating the adrenals, you're treating the thyroid, but really the gland that's sitting on the throne is the pituitary gland, and that's what's kind of controlling everything else, and everything else are just puppets. So it's kind of going back to this source and figuring out what is affecting this. And I did a heavy metal test on her, and sure enough, her mercury was off the charts.
We're finding it so much. So many people have heavy metals that we now test everybody on it because we have never found anybody who hasn't been high. Everybody is high in lead. It's just varying levels of lead. Mercury being the second. Aluminum is probably the third, but we see a lot of cadmium as well. So I think it's what would be really helpful, I think, for people to understand is, why is the pituitary getting it? Why is the pituitary this place that tends to be a sponge for these metals? So I don't know if one of you guys, Caitlin, you want to talk about, your experience with that, but I think that's probably the most important thing that we can educate people on today, is that hormonal imbalances can be traced back to the pituitary, and what's damaging the pituitary the most are these metals. And there's other things, but the metals are so important for people to know.
Right.
Oh yeah. Well, and the other thing too that I'm going to go down a little rabbit hole for about 1 minute. Whenever there's heavy metals, there's biotoxins, there's bacteria, there's other kind of infectious diseases that hang out there because those metals essentially create a barrier that your immune system can't get in and start getting rid of those infections. So I have yet to have somebody who doesn't have heavy metals with some form of infection-like patterns. And it doesn't mean, that you have these crazy infections and that you're really sick and you're going to have flu-like symptoms and all this other stuff. Not at all. I had absolutely no symptoms with my cavitations, none whatsoever. And they were like top worst that the surgeon's ever seen. And he did 8 years residency in the hospital, so he's seen a lot of crazy stuff. And so symptoms are a great way of our body just saying, hey, look, there's something going on, but we really got to focus in on what is causing it. And so, why do you think, Dr. Sonia, that heavy metals tend to migrate to the pituitary gland as much as they do?
Well, I think in the past, people understood that the blood-brain barrier was like this and nothing could get through. But we're learning more and more now that actually the same things that affect the gut will affect the blood-brain barrier. So when we're eating foods that are, say, non-organic, full of pesticides, glyphosate, and all these things, it makes us more susceptible to create those, gaps between those junctions. And then metals like mercury have a tendency to go towards the brain. And I think it was you that actually sent me a screenshot of a slide at a dental conference, I think it was, where mercury, the half-life of mercury is actually decades within the brain.
Wow.
And, in the kidney and liver, I believe it was 50 days, but decades. So imagine, yes, we got those vaccinations when we were infants, but it's still sitting in the brain and targeting the pituitary gland.
Yeah, and it builds.
And it builds. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit, because people who are listening may not know the different ways you can test for heavy metals, because I think that's pretty important. I don't know about you guys, but I get a lot of people that come in that have been testing, like they'll go and get a blood test, or they'll go get a hair analysis. So Dr. Sonia, I don't know if you want to start off. I think we all probably test the same way.
I tend to use urine.
Okay.
I find that to be the better way to do things. Because I do find that once you're taking that chelating agent, and it is really telling you exactly what you're excreting before taking something and afterwards. Whereas I find with something like hair, depending on what you're washing with and other things that are going on, there's going to be contamination. And that's kind of my understanding with that. And blood isn't really telling you what's in the tissues or what's, what you're excreting and how much of it. It's just what's kind of free in the blood that's kind of roaming around. I don't know if that makes sense.
We like blood if it's going to be an acute exposure, like you broke a huge thermometer, like the old school thermometer with mercury in it, and you got it all over your hands and things like that while you were cleaning it up, then blood is a great way to find out, okay, how toxic are you with mercury right now, because it was an acute exposure, versus, okay, what happened back when you were 5 and got all those toxins? Sorry guys, can you hear my dog hitting the bell?
Wanting its treat.
No, she wants to go outside, but she's playing this game in and out, and I'm not.
Oh, I hate that.
So what happens though is that's why blood just really isn't a great way to test for long-term exposure or what happened years ago. And that's just like you, Dr. Sonia, we do, if we are going to test heavy metals, we will do a urine challenge test. How about you, Dr. Mindy? What is it that you
Yeah, that's the same one, because I think it makes so much sense to me, especially with lead. So lead was what I had,
Right.
and it showed up at, like, 43. It started
Mhm.
coming out because my hormones were shifting, and it started to come out of the bone, and then
Mhm.
it went up into the brain, started to affect my brain.
Yeah.
So I'm such a fan of figuring out what's stored there and what could cause potential problems down the road.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably the most important, because I know you guys hear this all the time where people say, I was fine. I actually had a woman just today that was like, 6 months ago, I was so great. She's my age, so late 40s. She's like, I was awesome. I'm running. I was doing all these wonderful things, and I had so much energy. I was not depressed. And then boom, all of a sudden now I'm not sleeping. I'm having hot flashes. I have anxiety. She came into me. She's like, I haven't slept in 2 weeks. I'm going to go crazy.
Yeah.
And you better believe, don't have her test results yet, but you better believe the first test we're running on her is a heavy metal.
Metals.
That
Yeah.
something's coming out of her that is initiated right now. And I think that's where what I see is a lot of people will run the blood and they'll do the hair because the hair is cheap and it's easy, but it's not helpful. I want to know what's in there that is going to come out as you age. So,
or what's affecting or altering function, right? Because what's stuck is really what is changing and causing our body to malfunction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you guys want to talk about why using a chelating agent is so important for the test, and why it's important to follow the directions after the test?
Yes. Yeah, that's always the tricky one, because some of them are like, oh, I just stopped taking it after and felt nauseous and tired, and okay, there's a reason for that. So essentially what we're talking about is taking something like DMSA, a chelating agent, after you do your first morning urine, because your first morning urine is the most concentrated, right? So it's going to let us know what it is that you're excreting without something binding onto these metals. So once you take that binder, it's actually activating, or maybe not attracting these metals and taking them out of your urine or your body, so that you can measure the before and after effect. And what I like about, I don't know if you guys are using, what company do you use for metals? Because I think each one probably does something a bit different.
Yeah, we use the ones that you got to get in South Africa and have sent over here. I forget the name of it, but that's the one that we've been using.
Yeah. The one that I use will also do some minerals as well, which is really nice to see. Things like selenium and chromium and all these things, because it really tells you, okay, what is it that your body will hold on to, and what is it that it's continually excreting, causing things like blood sugar dysregulation and whatnot.
Are you talking specifically about what test or what chelating agent, Dr. Sonia?
Yeah.
What test?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we use Genova Diagnostics urine toxicity one. That's the one that we tend to use if we're going to do it. How about you, Dr. Mindy? What is it that you?
Yeah, we use doctor's data, and we've done both of those. Like you've talked about, we've done the one that just tells us metals, and then we've done the ones that tells us minerals. And they're both great. I agree. It's nice to have that mineral. The other thing I like, and I don't know if Genova's test does this, but I like to see the impact on the kidneys, and gives us an idea how long it's been there. I think that's pretty important as well. Because I don't know about you guys, but most people are shocked. They're like shocked when they look at that. I just got done with a woman whose lead is through the roof. I just went through her test, and she was just like, her mouth was open. She couldn't where did I get that from? How'd that happen? And I think it's such a misunderstood part of toxicity that everybody should be testing.
Yeah. I was shocked. Like, my lead was through the roof, and so was my mercury. But one thing I wanted to kind of point out with lead, a lot of people, or women specifically, are anemic. You know, they come in with a lot of fatigue, and what they don't know is that lead and iron actually compete for receptors. So in one of our previous podcasts, we talked about communication within the cell. So these receptors are waiting for these minerals and vitamins and hormones to come in and give us information, but lead will come in and just kind of sit there and not allow that communication to happen. So I think some people can come in and we can talk to them about this testing, but if there's not that understanding of like, this one thing is going to affect the entirety of your health, I think that's something to really drive home. that these metals affect us in many different ways.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about lead and the 4 generations? Because people, when I tell them this, it just blows them away.
Yeah.
Because they go, well, we don't use lead paint anymore, and we don't have, like, our kids' toys don't have lead in them, and there's been all these changes to try and make things safer. But why is it that every generation has more and more toxicity, even though we're trying as a society to decrease our exposure?
Yeah, well, we may be trying, but we're not succeeding. I'm not sure. Well, I'll speak to that because when I discovered that my lead was really high, I started to address it for myself. And when I started detoxing it, like, wow, my brain changed like massively. And at that time, I still didn't really understand where I got the lead from. I was more focused on get this out. And then about a couple months into my own lead detoxing, my older sister had a thyroid problem. And she called me up and she said, okay, I got this thyroid thing out of the blue. My thyroid's whacked. What should I do? And so I sent her off for a lead test, and hers was off the chart. Like, her lead was so high.
And she's older than you?
And she's older than me.
Yeah.
So we have not tested my mom. I wish I could test my mom. My mom's still alive. I wish I could test her. But my mom's very sensitive to any supplement you give her. And I'm not, maybe I'll send her to one of you guys to test her, but I don't really want to coach her
deal with the aftermath.
Yeah, I don't really want to coach her through that. I'm just going to, but my mom, if you look at symptom wise, my mom has always had thyroid problems. She's always had chronic pain. Chronic pain's been a big one, which is a symptom of too much lead. My sister then had thyroid problems, and my sister's had restless legs her whole life. She's still dealing with it. And then for me, it showed up, as anxiety and depression. So to speak to what you're talking about is lead gets passed down through 4 generations. And, it makes perfect sense that when our hormones shift, that it softens the bones and lets this lead come out of the bone, goes into the womb to the baby when you're in the womb, and it continues to get passed down. So we're the classic family of the 4 generations. I can't remember my grandma. I can't remember her. She had cancer, but her mental health was great. And then you better believe that I'm really focused on my daughter, my firstborn, to make sure. We've already done 1 90-day detox on her. We haven't tested her yet, but I'm already thinking about how we continue to pull it out of her. So that's how it showed up for us. What about you guys?
Yeah, my mom's had thyroid issues since I can remember. And thinking about where they grew up in India, and, what was in the soil and all that too. So it's like what you were saying, when you're pregnant, the lead's already in the bones, and the calcium is coming out of the mom's bones, unfortunately, but along with that is the lead attached to it. So it starts there. And I noticed it in my son, my oldest. He is iron deficient. So when he gets bruises, it's really hard for things to shift, for him to heal. And it wasn't until I did my lead test that I was like, oh, this is it. And so his lead is going to be high too. So I need to detox him. I haven't done the test yet, but I'm certain that it is.
You just actually got me thinking, my daughter has bloody noses all the time. Do you think that's an iron deficiency?
Possible. Have you looked in? Sometimes some kids, their turbinates, or all of us, on one side is higher than or more pronounced on one side.
I'll go and look.
Yeah,
I don't know. When you said that, I was like thinking about my daughter and thinking, what has she exhibited that might be lead-like? Interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got off on my own tangent.
No, it's good. I'm sure others are thinking the same thing.
Yeah, right. Well, and you know what? And I'll tell you, because my daughter turns 18 in a week, which totally freaks me out. But I always say, I want to keep detoxing her, really not only for her benefit, but for my grandchildren's benefit.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really like, we got to work on this now that she's like getting older and she can understand these concepts better. and she's willing to go into deeper detoxes. She just started doing more intermittent fasting, and she's doing more of the ketogenic. So she's like grabbing onto this stuff, and my brain is like, okay, I've got 10 years to like detox the heck out of her so that my grandchildren come out perfect.
Yeah. No pressure. No pressure at all.
Yeah, I know, because I wouldn't tell her that.
No.
That's just what I'm thinking. Just between the three of us.
Yeah, and all those listening.
And everybody else. I'll make sure she doesn't listen to this episode.
Right.
No, but it's seriously a fear because we don't have kids yet. And when I did that, I was like, oh my God, that's what I'm going to give to my kids. Because just like you said, so what happens is we end up storing heavy metals in our bones. And so when hormones shift, so either during puberty, pregnancy, or menopause, our body releases lead. And that lead can go and redeposit elsewhere, whether it be up in the brain, in the pituitary, our fat cells, which could cause us to have problems losing weight. And it can really throw off our body's function and cause a whole variety of symptoms. And so it's so important to really look at brain function. And then when you know what's going on, it's even more important to detox properly. Because if you do it improperly, you could be in, for a world of hurt. Your symptoms could get way, way, way worse. You won't feel any better, and it could just create a cascading effect for other symptoms to arise. So what do you guys think would be one of the best things for people to start off with? Why don't we do this? Let's start by listing off different symptoms that people could be experiencing based on having dysfunctioning pituitary glands or brain communication.
Well, things like hormonal irregularities, so your periods could be off, PMS, fatigue, depression, anxiety. I don't know if there's anything that doesn't. Right.
I think sleep is the biggest one. That's next to memory loss. That's the other one I hear when I ask people how you sleeping. Most everybody's like not well, and then they're relying on things like Ambien for the solution, and that's deadly. So I think sleep is a really important one for people to realize.
And what should their sleep look like? Because I hear this all the time. I'm sure you guys get it. I get 5 hours of sleep. I function 4 hours of sleep.
8 to 10.
Yeah.
I mean, I still have young kids, so I don't even know what that looks like. Right? I was telling Caitlin this last weekend, I have PTSD from their infancy years, and even now, if there's just a sound, it's a pattern that develops for the next week or two, where I'm up at 2, I'm up at 4, I'm up at 6.
Oh God.
So maybe Mindy, you can take that one on, because I don't actually know anymore.
No, I mean, this is a whole nother episode, but we went years co-sleeping, and there was probably a good decade I didn't sleep. And so I totally remember that waking up. But now I'm the first one to go to bed, and I'm the first one to get up, and they sleep great now, and we're all
something to look forward to.
Okay, good. So, but you know what, that was actually sleep was one of the triggers that made me look for heavy metals as well, because I've always been, except when my kids were little, I was always a really good sleeper. I could sleep anywhere, any place, anytime. And then I started waking up and staying up, and I'm like, something's off. Why this has not ever been a problem of mine. So I think to answer your question is that you should hit that pillow and fall asleep pretty quickly. And you should stay asleep all the way till it's time to get up. And you're well rested if you get up before your alarm. When your alarm is
feeling refreshed.
And
because some people do sleep through, but then they're still groggy in the morning, so you're not getting that restful sleep. So there's something going on there.
Right. And I think people wake up. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but 2 to 3 in the morning is classic. I have a practice full of people that wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and they either can't go back to sleep, or they just wake up, and that's just like their natural cycle.
Well, I believe in Chinese medicine, that's the liver hour, right? So when the liver is doing its job, trying to detoxify and dumping these toxins out, that's usually when people wake up, because now all of a sudden there's some activation happening in their body.
Yeah.
That's actually when I start waking up between 2 and 3. If my dog's not waking me up, which normally doesn't, then I know, okay, I got to do some more liver support right now because my body's going through another detoxification phase. So,
And
it doesn't have to last.
Yeah, and what I've seen a lot too is progesterone deficiency. So a lot of women, especially when they're kind of going through that perimenopausal stage, it's usually a low progesterone, and but that too is coming from up here, right? Going back to the pituitary gland again. So yes, you can take progesterone, and I have seen that really shift people's sleep. But then 6 weeks from there or months from now, the same thing's going to happen. You're going to either have to take more or do something different, and it's going back to the source again.
Yeah, I think that's.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that's such an important point because, you know, in the alternative world, so many people could end up chasing symptoms and they're just, you know, they're taking a pill for this and a pill for that. And even though it's natural, they're, you know, thank God it's natural, they're still ending up down a rabbit hole and they're never accomplishing true health. And I think what your point is so important. And that's what I know all of us see in our offices is that when you get to that root cause, when you get the metals out of the pituitary, wow, like everything shifts, everything changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is it a quick fix, guys?
No. You
wish.
laugh.
So how many brain phases have you guys done?
I've done 2 so far.
6.
Okay.
6, yeah.
Dr. Caitlin, how many have you done? 6?
I actually think I'm going to get ready to do another one.
Yeah, I'm starting another one too.
So, and what we're referring to is that the way that we detox metals is it's a 3-month protocol to begin with, which is really building the body up with preparing it. And then we pull it out of the body and then we pull it out of the brain. And the brain phase is, to me, the wildest ride that most of our patients will have. It's either going to be amazing, like they come in and they're like, oh my God, I'm experiencing happiness like I've never experienced before, or I'm sleeping for the first time, or it's going to be a crazy down.
What are you doing to me?
Why?
right.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious. So I've done 3 brain and I need to do more. And every time I go to do it, I'm like, okay, here we go.
Yourself.
Because and I tell everybody around me, I feel like I need a t-shirt that says like, you know, keep calm, I'm just brain detoxing.
Right.
But my biggest thing is that as the metals come out, my memory in the process of coming out, my memory can be off. What do you guys notice?
Yeah, my first one, I felt amazing. Like the brain fog was gone. I felt energy that I hadn't felt before. The second one was a completely different experience. I was more emotional. Depression is more my tendency to kind of go inward and want to stay there. I was feeling that a bit more. And that's where I was like, okay, you know, there's a new one that needs to start. And that's actually why I did that 4-day fast too, that we did back in January, because I find that helped shift things for me, but I'm still feeling like there's something lingering. So another brain phase is in the works in the coming month.
See, I felt nothing.
What about you?
Nothing the first one.
Oh, really?
Nope, nothing the first one.
That's why you've done 6.
The second one, I felt great. Or no. The second one I felt terrible. And I was like, oh God. The third one I felt better. And then just little better. And then after 6, so detoxing for like 9 months, because I did take a break in between, like a couple weeks break kind of thing. Between a couple of them, I was like, okay, my body just needs a break for a little bit. And I think I'm going to go back and do another one, maybe the beginning of March. I might start that one. So, but
my first one was life-changing. Like you, Dr. Sonia, it's just like my anxiety went away. It was incredible. But then the other 2 were I felt like I couldn't remember. Here's a perfect example. I kept walking around thinking that my daughter's birthday was March 3rd and it's March 1st. And I was making all these plans around her birthday. And I was like, this was a year ago. And I was like, oh my God, wait a second. I like had a whole plan set up. And then I realized it hit me. Oh my God, her birthday's March 1st. So, but it was exciting because it's like, oh my God, that junk is coming out. I want that out. I want it out.
I think what you said there is important because people will feel really frustrated, or they start feeling like, okay, this isn't working when they start to feel worse. But I think the thing to hit home is that, you know, something is shifting, right? To focus on that. So when these metals and these toxins have been stuck for so long, they're not just going to get pulled out and you feel nothing and it's all good. It takes time, right?
Yeah.
Well, and that, you know, the anxiety and things like that. So a lot of people are on anti-anxiety, antidepressant medications, and I don't want to get off and start talking about, you know, the school shootings and all that, because it's just getting ridiculous. But every mass school shooting, the shooter has been on antidepressants. And so it makes me think, okay, well, what the heck is this poor individual dealing with, you know, ahead of time? Like, and I'm not saying by any means what they did was right, because obviously it's not, but by treating a symptom and just covering it up with these medications, it's definitely not helping the individual.
No.
And there are other ways. Now, by no means, everybody that's listening, I'm not saying don't use the medications. There's not a time and a place. There is, but it's not fixing the problem. And so I'm sure, like you guys, with some of our patients, we've seen massive change in anxiety levels and depression and energy and sleep and hormone function. Like we've had people, when we clean the crap out of the brain, they start menstruating again when they haven't menstruated in a year and a half.
Oh my gosh. I've had people come out of menopause, like been in menopause for a couple of years, and they come out. They're like, wow.
So they could be excited or maybe angry with you for that.
Depending on their age, right?
Right.
Because people are going into menopause in their late 30s now, and that's not okay.
No. I had a young girl that didn't have a period for 5 years. Wow. And now she's menstruating again. And just the other day, what I love is when patients forget they had anxiety. So I was talking to a patient, and I'm like, oh, well, you know, how's the anxiety feeling? She's like, oh yeah. I was in a car with a woman that was driving all crazy and eating, and I felt nothing. I didn't feel the anxiety come up.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think what you said, Dr. Caitlin, is, I mean, again, I think we need a whole show on that. Because it doesn't make sense that you've got toxic women giving birth to toxic babies, growing up in a toxic environment. And then on top of that, you give them social media, you put the pressure of school, and then you make guns so accessible. And now you know, in my opinion, that is why we have this ridiculous situation that we have. And yet nobody's talking about the toxic brain. Like, this is the one in my town. And the thing that's really, really agitating me is that we've got all these kids that are suicidal and anxious, like at the highest level we've ever seen. And what they end up doing is pulling them out of school. And then once they pull them out of school, they never go back. They never get back into school. So now these kids are either being homeschooled, or they're getting GEDs, or it's really common in my town. They send them off to Utah to help get their brains turned around. And nobody's seeing that it's a toxic issue. It's a toxic brain issue. And these families are struggling, and the kids are struggling, and nobody's teaching them brain detox.
We could have a whole show on autism.
Oh my God, yeah.
The rise in autism, the rise in ADHD, and all these behavioral things. It's all linked together.
Yeah.
Well, but the hard part is, we're exposed on a daily basis. So like all of those, the makeup that we use, the shampoos, the conditioners, they all have toxins, and they just get absorbed. So think of it like whatever you're breathing, whatever you're eating, whatever you're putting on you, it's getting absorbed into you, and it has to go somewhere. And the highest place, or the easiest place, is nerve tissues. So brain, your spinal cord, your nerves, and then fat cells. And so, you know, if we're not doing anything to address our exposure, by, like, the one thing I tell everybody is decrease your conventional vegetable and fruit intake. Eat organic, because the glyphosate just drives all of those toxins deeper into your brain. And so if we can start by decreasing our toxic load and not driving those toxins deeper, that's the first step. And then the second step is finding somebody who's capable of finding out what I'm experiencing, why you're experiencing, and then working with you to work through it and get it gone, for lack of a better term.
Can you talk a little more about that, just so that everybody understands? Like, I think that's such an important point, that the glyphosate on the non-organic foods is like putting fuel on a fire. And so explain that a little bit more so people understand that.
So glyphosate is it's Roundup, for an easier way to describe it. And that's why wheat. So everybody's like, oh, gluten sensitivity, biggest bogus, blah, blah, blah. Well, what happens is farmers spray wheat with glyphosate because it increases their yield. It speeds up drying time. They don't lose as much to mold because it essentially causes the wheat to dry out faster, which then allows them to cut it. The problem is, though, that glyphosate, when we ingest it, what it does is any of the toxins floating around in our system, from our deodorant to our shampoo to whatever was sprayed on our apple that we just ate, that glyphosate drives those toxins deeper into our nervous system, our fat cells, and then it causes a total shift in our hormone function regulation and everything.
Yeah.
So that's one of the, like, back to the very first episode when we said, you know, what are some of the things that you can implement now? That's why eating organic is so important. And most of my patients, I tell them they can't have wheat. I don't touch it. Like I will not touch wheat. But if you're going to do it, you have to make sure that it's 100% organic, because you don't want that stuff stirring everything up and making your whole system function worse or slower or anything like that.
Well, it's going back to that gut-brain interaction too. So the glyphosate will right away cause that leaky gut, right? So we had talked about earlier that we have that barrier in our gut. We also have that same barrier in our brain. So if it's causing leaky gut here, it's going to be causing some leakiness in the brain as well.
Yeah, and that's why they call our gut our second brain. There's so much research now showing actually that most of our serotonin and dopamine is produced in our gut. And so when we have problems producing dopamine, which is our happy hormone, it's not likely a brain issue, it's likely a gut issue. When we have a gut issue, we can link it back to the brain. And so it's like, okay, well, which one?
So if you had to go down a list, it would be of like, okay, so as you're listening to this, you were about to go through some of the other things that people could do, Dr. Caitlin. But if you had to go down a list of, I want to improve my brain health, what I think we would all agree that number one is eat organic. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. What would number two be?
Do you want to?
Oh, me?
Either one. Dr. Sonia, you can take it. What would be your second thing?
I would say, I think the episode that you two did about the household products, the things that you're exposed to every day. So your makeup, your the sprays that are around you, the cleaners that you're using. Look at your environment that you're in and getting rid of those things so that you're decreasing the load.
Yeah, so if we're doing first, eat organic, second, decrease your toxic load through whatever. The third would be get tested. Find somebody that is going to test you appropriately to find out what's actually stored in your body, not what's floating around in your blood, because that's going to be a very inaccurate test. And I'm almost willing to bet if the person knows how to test you properly, they're able to help you detox properly.
Detox you,
I
also think at some point we should talk about, maybe this is another episode too, hormonal testing, because there's different ways of doing that too, and there's different times that one is better than the other, and I don't think there's a real deep understanding around that. So if you're going to get it, going to be getting your heavy metals tested, and hormones is a huge picture for women, and most women will be getting the hormones tested at the same time.
So, okay. So eat organic, test your beauty products. Think Dirty app is the one I love. I think you use Skin Deep, Dr. Caitlin.
I use both of them. It just depends on if it's on one or not on the other. I'll scan both.
And then get your metals tested and get your hormones tested. I'll tell you another really easy, quick one that I recommend to everybody is I think everybody should be on Restore. because I don't think that there's no way that we can avoid. I don't know about you guys, but unless you're going to eat in your house all the time, which we do most of the time. But if you go out, there's no way to prevent a leaky gut, getting that glyphosate exposure. And so Restore being the thing that really can seal up the gut so you don't get these toxins absorbed. Yeah. Would you guys agree?
I would. Yeah. Restore. It's a big part of what we take with us when we're traveling.
Yep.
So and I wanted to kind of go back to that bread comment that, or wheat in general, you were saying with the mold, Dr. Caitlin. We were in Mexico and we actually bought some like sourdough bread, just, as a treat as we're traveling, and it went moldy the next day. So I was like, this is real bread.
Yeah, right.
What it's supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
Not the one that's going to sit on the shelf for weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
So really thinking really deeply about the food we're consuming is so important. So the Restore was, it was something we were taking daily while we
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, we do that. I take the little travel one, and I just, when I'm traveling, I just in my mouth a little, 1 or 2 squirts. So that's really, really important. So
that, and the other thing that we use on top of Restore is it's a digestive enzyme. It's called Gluten to help us if we do accidentally get exposed, because unlike you, Dr. Sonia, you're more adventurous than me. There's no way I'd be buying sourdough bread because I know how I'll respond.
Yeah,
right.
But, if I accidentally get exposure to something, like it was in a sauce and whatever, I will pop a couple of those just to help my system break it down, so I'm not driving in anything else deeper.
Yeah. And that might be something we want to talk about a different episode too, is the hidden places where you find gluten. Because there's a lot of restaurants, you can get a nice salad and you get a dressing and you don't realize there's actually gluten in the dressing.
Right.
So you have to ask for gluten-free dressing.
I think gluten could be a really good episode, because I think people have a tendency to go like, oh, phew, I'm not allergic to gluten. Thank God, that's my friend that's allergic to gluten. But in reality, nobody's benefits from gluten the way it's grown right now. Nobody.
Yeah,
and
unfortunately.
The brain is the big piece that's getting the brunt of this. So when people say I can eat bread and I have no problem, but then they're not telling you, they're not making that connection between their ingestion of bread and their brain and their memory loss.
Right.
Yeah, because they're looking for digestive issues, right? They're looking for bloating or constipation or something like that. Like for me, I know we had some wheat while Caitlin and Niles were down, and I did in front of them.
You all had wheat. You all had wheat.
I had wheat, not her.
I sure as heck did not.
Wow.
I wouldn't be here today if I did.
And I was telling them like this is it for me for the rest of like this month, essentially, because if I have too much, it's anger, it's irritability, it's mood stuff, right? So but people don't make that link together.
Yeah. So does your husband like bat it out of your hand when you go to put it in your mouth so he doesn't get doesn't get the angry version of you?
Yeah, totally.
That's funny.
No, don't take that.
No. Yeah, well, I didn't know that was my reaction until years ago. I did a 40-day detox from gluten, dairy, sugar, and all that. And I remember going, being Indian, wheat is like staple in our households. And I remember going to my parents' house, and my mom made, I don't know if you guys know what paratha is, but essentially it's like a stuffed roti. So it's like stuffed with like other yams or fenugreek and it's, our favorite thing that we grew up with. So I'm thinking, okay, I can have some. And I remember feeling so irritable at what anybody said after. I was like, okay, that's my thing. Yeah. Because I don't get the digestive stuff. It's up here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this was really good. I think we need to take brain health and split it into a lot of different topics, because I think it's really important. It's such an important part of people's lives that they're I think Dr. Caitlin, you said that it's aging. You know what? The human body's meant to live to 120. It's not meant to start to lose memory at 40 or 30 or 20. So it really, I think it's so important for people to understand how powerful what you eat and what you put on your skin and what you're brushing your teeth with, and all these pieces day after day after day are either building you a healthy brain or they're building you a toxic brain.
Also, what you think.
what you think. Well, there's,
Yeah, because you can think
nother,
toxic thoughts
right?
or non-toxic thoughts, and it'll have the same effect.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's where you can see the picture of why so many people are depressed and anxious and suicidal, because it's not just, we live in the most thought toxic time too, depending on who you're hanging around and what you're watching. And it really, I see, and I know you guys are the same way, I see so clearly all the different things that need to happen for our teenage world, and our kids. It's really sad, the environment they're growing up in. So but
now
it's super tough. My daughter tells me that all the time. She's like, Mom, you don't know what it's like to grow up right now. I'm like, I don't, and I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
My son told me the other day that he's like, I bet it was really really cool up in the 80s.
It was.
I'm like, it
Minus
was.
the vaccines.
Everything was fluorescent.
We had the best music, and my hair was like, I could just let that thing get puffy.
Yeah.
It worked. So, but what I love about what we talked about today, because I think it's the absolute most important thing for the brain, is glyphosate and heavy metals. Like, hands down, those two things have to be addressed. Before you start geeking out on fancy ways to boost neurotransmitters, you've got to deal with those two things. So I love that we started the conversation with this.
So since Dr. Mindy's not going to be with us next week, she's going to be taking care of some dental things for herself, possibly, hopefully not. I hope you don't have them.
You've got me scared now, but I'll come back the following week and I'll let you know.
But then you're going to keep going.
I'll send you a list of things that you should start taking now.
Okay, great.
So Dr. Sonia, do you want to talk about hormones, or which one would you like us to talk about, Dr. Mindy? Hormones?
We can talk about hormones. No, talk about hormones. That's fine. You guys can do that.
Okay.
That'd be great.
So we'll continue the thought process of connecting the brain to our hormones, and how brain imbalance can throw off hormones like estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, linking PCOS and early menopause and prepubescent, like kids going into puberty too soon, or whatever it may be.
I love it.
Perfect.
Awesome. I can't wait to listen to it. I'll come back and hop right on and listen to it. So that's great.
All right, ladies.
Awesome. Okay, this was a good one.